Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we're going to continue talking about Squire Boone. One big thing that is always very important to bring up. And again, you mentioned the Boone luck, and I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of ourselves here. And I might be, but it's okay. Talking about Boone, so Squire Boone, he goes up and we mentioned he's moved quite a bit, but he goes to Shelbyville, and builds a station, Squire Boone Station, and he's there. For a while, I guess, a long enough time to get a good enough group of people to stays at the station. We can go on about Fort Station, whatever, but basically a small fort. Well, the people there at the station get word that there's a Native American attack that's imminent, gonna happen. So many of the people think, well, maybe we should move on down the road, go head towards Louisville, where there is a bit more fortified and so forth. Squire Boone, however, is not. I believe he's been injured, so he's not able to move. Him and his family decide to stay, basically because they can't take him on. And then, as the settlers have left, they're going down. The Long Run Massacre, I believe as it's called, takes place. The Native Americans attack all of these fleeing settlers, and pretty much they're all killed.
Something like 60 people, I think.
Yes. And then, Boone or Squire and them, they luckily are able to survive that, basically because they didn't go, they stayed. But a little bit of Boone luck, I believe, was there.
Right. And you wonder about that too. And I which of the injuries was most severe? Because we mentioned Boonesboro a second ago, the siege of Boonesboro. Squire shot in the shoulder. So do we know what the injury was that he's recovering from in 81? Because the attack on the Long Run thing is 1781. So
yeah.
I don't know what.
I don't know. I can't think of what it was right now. I mean, he could have just been sick. It could have been he was kind of sick. it may have not have been a well, I mean, I was going to say it may not have been a physical injury, but being sick is still a physical
Yeah.
injury or problem. But yeah, I don't know right off what it was. Maybe it'll hit me here in a little bit. Um, but yeah, um, that is a little bit ahead. I knew I was jumping ahead, but I wanted to go ahead and get that because the Boone luck.
The example.
There's
That's
some
right.
yeah. But anyway, Squire he did fight in many battles. I don't. He was a captain at one point. I don't know if he ever
Mhm.
got any higher than captain. Um,
I don't
but
think so.
he was captain of about 23 men in the militia, um, and was a justice of the peace. You know,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
like we
Both
said, performed
honorable.
many marriages. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Both honorable positions in the community. Very important because if you're a captain, you're the head of a local company, so you've got quite a few people under your command. County-sized formations usually are regiments. That's ran by a colonel, and then beneath the colonel you get captains in various precincts. But yeah, I mean, he was a major part of the community. And I ran into a court case involving Squire once. The only real problems, I guess, that stick out to me about Squire, it was kind of funny because there's a fellow named George Smith who's also an early founder, and with a very generic name, unfortunately, but he's there from the beginning too. And it's during their stay in Shelby County, and his property overlaps some with Squire's, and
Hmm.
this guy had a reputation for being a hothead, and so he chose to kind of take it up with Squire without too many words. And the end result was he's suing for damages because the Boones apparently whipped him off the land. So, Squire, he could hold his own when he needed to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Going back though, I believe he was shot in the arm in '81. That's what it was, shot in the shoulder.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Oh, okay.
so but that was with Simon Gerty. So Simon Gerty in '81, um,
Yeah.
and his band, they ambushed the settlement, and then uh, he was shot in the arm, and Simon Gerty kind of took it as a big victory, boastful thing to say, that he had made Squire Boone and all them, run, tuck tail and
Right.
run. Um, but anyway, a lot of that stuff's happening. Um, of course, we're talking about, the 1770s in Kentucky's, Native American attacks were massive, and even into the 1780s.
Yeah.
This was the big, I guess, hindrance problem that a lot of the frontier settlers um, endured, I guess, if you want to say it that way. Um, Also, want to throw out the Painted Stone Station. That was kind of Squire's name for the station.
Yeah. They're in Shelby County. Yeah.
Yeah, they're in Shelby County. Yep, yep. Um, but yeah, then as we said, the Long Run Massacre kind of takes place. All that kind of stuff goes on, and then uh, about 2 days later, that's when Floyd leads about 300 men to give battle to the Native Americans. But they were all gone. So, you know,
Right.
I guess it's one of those situations. They kind of did the attack the fleeing settlers, and then they left, and that was
Right.
it. So,
I think they learned at that point that attacking fortified positions, they didn't have the munitions nor the supplies to do it. So if you were entrenched, by this late in the Revolution, you had a good chance of surviving because the Battle of Boonesboro and the siege of Harrodsburg and all these things have already happened, and they're just not willing to risk it. So luckily for Squire, he and his family had stayed behind.
yep, yep. Um, and yeah, so yeah, after all that, the station, pretty much stays occupied for a little bit. I'm not really sure how long um, it lasts. Squire, of course, he moves on.
Yeah.
Um, Pretty much about the next year after the whole massacre and all that kind of stuff happens, he leaves. Um, yeah.
And Squire suffers like Boone the loss of his lands, through court cases and that kind of thing. Because by 1786, but just 5 short years after you're fighting tooth and nail to defend this land.
Yeah.
Squire has lost his lands and is really looking for new opportunities, the same way Boone does when he leaves Kentucky.
Yeah.
And he does serve some in the Virginia legislature, which I find interesting. That's the late 80s, I think. He serves 2 terms there. And he's pleading for support from Virginia and shows up at the legislature wounded. I mean, talk about it's hard to have a picture's worth 1,000 words, a better testimony of the support needed. And I'd
Yeah.
like to think that helped push the legislature of Virginia, to
Mhm.
approve Kentucky's, statehood, because the militia system wasn't getting it done.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and, yeah, you roll into, the legislature and say, "Hey, we need some help, guys." And
Right.
he's, beaten and bruised. Yeah, okay. Maybe we should send him. But yeah,
Yeah.
um,
It's a good point.
yeah, yeah, and he, he served in legislature, which, Daniel did, but not as, not that much. And honestly, I'm not sure how much even Daniel did. I know he was a justice of the peace for a while and stuff like that, but he
Hmm.
wasn't as, which I mean, Squire didn't serve as much either. I don't think either one of them were really political people.
Right.
uh,
Yeah, it's
but
probably true.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But he goes on, tries again at old Fort Herod, to settle in there about 1782. Um, the spring of '83, he returned to Painted Stone, and to his, horror, he found it at his house, and the fort had been burned down. So it did not last much after he had left it. Um, and again, it's like it's like this constant. Well, let's move on to the next thing. Let's move on to the next place. He led a group of settlers back to the area to rebuild. The time that Squire built, he built a grist mill, a sawmill, and was elected to the Kentucky Convention in Danville to represent Lincoln County. Good old, good old Lincoln County.
Yeah.
Uh, Big old Lincoln County, I guess, at that time.
Yeah. You're stretching from one end of the state to the other, so that's impressive.
Yeah, yeah, and again, um, again, Daniel. I don't believe Daniel was at the any of the conventions that I know of, um, for statehood for Kentucky.
I'll
Um,
have to go back and read the journals on those.
yeah, which are pretty cool stuff. All that early Kentucky history stuff. But anyway, or the formation of the state. In 1786, Squire, again, like we said, fell in debt. Creditors come in, land holdings. Pretty much, things were going downhill, just like they did with his brother, as far as that, which we mentioned that, the surveying. Um, you know, uh, he sold some of his land to John Filson,
Right.
um, and which would later interview his brother. So nice little connection, But if old Squire was thinking, he was like, "Hey, man, why don't you write that biography about me?" And
Yeah.
um, so
Wait,
he go ahead.
no, no, I was gonna say it is funny that he chooses the same path as Boone, but I've always wondered what drew him to the places he went to, because his next step, his next plan, really diverges from his brother in a way that maybe it hadn't before.
Yeah, and yeah, so he buys Willis Station, which is a few miles west of Redstone, and uh, again goes back to the Virginia Assembly. But it was during this time he voted to ratify the United States Constitution. So, I mean, right there, I mean, that's a big step up to old
That's
brother, when you
Yeah,
say.
that's right.
So, I mean, he's a founding father of the.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. His vote counted and carried Virginia forward. So
Yeah, yeah. Which, soon after, um, Kentucky becomes a state. So, but uh, shortly after, many of the settlers were moving onto the lands that Squire had claimed. Um, they had, kind of the better documentation and so forth. And this is when Squire says, "You know what? I'm gonna leave Kentucky." So that's where
yeah,
our story. No.
Well, it's funny because if you're leaving Kentucky, it seems like, of course, Mississippi River is opening up to some degree, but to go to Mississippi, because he ends up in northern Mississippi, seems like an odd choice to me. And I guess the theory is, like Daniel, you're going to try to do trade on the river. I mean,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's a.
you know,
I guess that would be the ideal thing to do. I guess if because I mean, again, I think going more west is going to cause more problems with Native Americans, and they're kind of just back in the same boat they were
yeah,
in. But by the river, I guess that makes a bit more sense. I think of all the impending problems that come, which they of course had no idea of that. I'm thinking of like the Spanish and you know the New Orleans, and then um, the whole Spanish conspiracy, and that kind of involved Kentucky as well. Um,
yeah,
all that stuff is going on, but they didn't have any idea that was going to happen. They were probably just thinking about almost set up by the river and trade, which
right.
I trying to do the math in my head, but I don't know exactly how old he would be at this point. I mean, he's in his 40s for sure, because I think 44 was when he was born. Um,
Yeah,
at least that's what we said.
yeah.
Yeah, 44 he was born.
His last
Yeah.
term in the legislature is what, 1790. So
Mhm.
he's for the time period. I mean, he's in his 50s.
Yeah. So
So,
maybe that's his thought. I'm just going to settle up by the river and watch the boats go by.
yeah,
Um,
of course, Daniel tries it in Maysville, but I
mhm.
mean, this is a whole different ball game because, as you said, you're trusting the Spanish, to play nice and get trade to market at New Orleans. So it was a gamble, and I think one that doesn't turn out to be too profitable for him because it's not long before he's moving again.
Yeah, yeah. What you did also, he was a gunsmith a little while he was in New Orleans, so that paid off.
Yep, yep, that trade came back.
But yeah, so he does um, move back to Kentucky uh, to learn that basically he's lost even more land.
Yeah,
Not the best thing. Uh, and and then he moves again. He moves to Florida. But then in 1792, he was called to Pennsylvania to handle a family matter, and he stayed with his family until 95. So kind of a just back and forth in many ways here, all over the place.
right.
Um, he does eventually make it back to Kentucky again in Shelby County. And lives with one of his sons who is operating this a grist mill, um, and then he kind of fought to straighten out his land claims, but again, stuff just didn't work out, and that's a whole nother thing is getting into why some land claims or why the original or the first people who came, the land
Yeah,
claims just didn't stay or didn't stick for
right.
many of them. Which is a shame because they did, kind of settle a lot of the land. But that's another episode of its own. So,
Yeah, there's a
uh,
neat book called How the West Was Lost by a historian named Stephen Aran, and he talks about all these founding fathers, and that's the whole purpose of the book. They come in and the future looks bright, and people just like Squire over the decades see that erode until they've got nothing left.
hmm yep, yep. And they had to move on. I mean, basically, they move on, west. And Squire does again. He goes and moves in with his brother for a while. Lives in Missouri. Um,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like I said earlier. They're repeating the things. They go out west, and then what are they doing? Helping people come out west, and people are just pouring out
Right.
west, just like they were 10 years ago in Kentucky. Um,
Yeah, and it's interesting because you wonder, are you living on your skill set as an explorer, or are you living on your name at that point because people know who you are? And so,
yeah,
if you're going west and you got a chance to have Daniel Boone or Squire Boone be your guide, I mean, you're going to bank on that. So I think
yeah,
at that point you're coasting, you're cashing in on that reputation a little bit, but you don't get any of the
yeah,
benefits of the communities you settled. So it's a two-edged
yeah,
sword.
yeah, yeah. They're they're probably being paid some sort of amount to help, but then that's probably where it ends
Right.
as far as those things go. In 1806, Squire moves his family near Corydon,
Mm-hmm.
Indiana,
Burden. Yep, just
and
across the river there.
he's got his four sons and the son of his brother Samuel Boone. Um, the area it's 25 miles from Louisville,
Mm.
and it's called the Boone Township now. So
Yep.
um, again, getting their name on stuff, that's one thing for sure. Um,
Right.
uh, but yeah, that's the thing. The land that he had in Indiana contained a cave, and that's where that was very kind of sacred to him, I guess, is the way to go. Um, while he was being chased by some Native Americans there, he fell into the cave, and he kind of managed to escape death.
Right.
Uh, so he kind of made it known that when he died, he wanted to be buried in that cave.
Yeah.
Which again, so some more of that Boone luck. Um,
Right. Yeah, and even now, I mean, Boone Caverns, if you go up there, it's kind of a tourist destination.
mhm,
And I think we've got like whitewater rafting in the area and that kind of thing.
yeah,
But even 100 years ago, it was still a tourist destination because people knew he was there. And
yeah,
I think maybe that's another reason that Daniel comes off, well, and James Harrod and so many of these early, pioneers, they come off as more exciting or mystical because we know where Boone's buried, probably. If you ask,
99% sure.
yeah, you ask people from Missouri, they give you a different answer. But
Yeah,
there's that mystery around him. But people knew where Squire was, and to the point that they were making pilgrimage up and maybe messing around with his grave site and looking for souvenirs and that kind of thing. And
hmm
I think that takes the mystery out of it by adding, mortality.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very true, and that's one thing. Like you said in Squire Boone. So at this place or where he's ended up buried, Traveler's Rest, uh, he kind of you know really kind of left his mark there, I guess, if you want to say that. He had carved symbols and stuff on the mill, uh, on the foundation stones,
Right.
and then he even carved a quote.
Yeah, very much so. Even in the name, because Isaac Shelby ends up naming his estate in South Central Kentucky the same thing, Traveler's Rest. And for these guys, it was truly the ultimate goal. You think of the afterlife and heaven as a place of eternal rest and repose. That was the end game for what they were searching for, especially a minister on the frontier like Squire. And so it was not just a pretty word or something like that. It was something truly to be valued that you had found a place of rest.
And that's pretty much where we get to the end. Squire died on August 5th, 1815, at the age of 70. I mean, pretty good. And then even him and Boone, and you think about Simon Kenton too, they lived long lives for their time. And
Yeah,
to think of the many struggles they went through, really long lives. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't, I don't know what else to say about that fact. I mean,
but
that's
of course,
go ahead.
I'm biased in saying this, but Squire survives the War of 1812 too. So you're in southern Indiana, you're not on the front lines, but it's not very far to Elkhart and places like that where Indian villages are actively attacking whole regiments of troops. So you never quite escape that um, sense of urgency or the deaths around the corner. So yeah, it makes the ends of their lives even more impressive
Yeah,
that they live that long.
yeah. So he was some other interesting things is he was actually buried in the cave that he wanted to be buried in, and in a casket that he actually made for himself. So that's pretty interesting. People kind of kept taking things from his grave, so including some of his bones. So in 1973, a new coffin was built, and to kind of stove off those poachers, I guess, or grave thieves or whatever you want to
Yeah,
call them. I don't know if you can go and tour it now anymore.
I'm not sure.
Maybe if it's a guided tour, they're probably not gonna let you just wander around,
Yeah,
obviously. Um, Yeah. Some people say they were removed and buried on what is now Fort Knox, but that's just hearsay.
Right.
Yeah. Um, Another interesting thing: Squire instructed his sons to camp at the mouth of his burial cave and that wait to see that life could express itself after death. As he aged, he believed that he could speak to them from the grave. The sons did as he wished, but they did not hear anything. So,
Ah, I didn't know that. So I learned something new.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I guess sum it all up, man. What do you think? I mean, or anything else you had to add about Squire? I mean,
Yeah, no, I think Squire is a victim of his own success. He moves around a lot, like Boone, like his older brother, but Squire doesn't have being captured by Indians in the colorful tales, at least the same way that
mhm.
Daniel does. Squire doesn't have the mist of time that kind of surrounds so much of his life and even his death. He was an American frontiersman who, once all the smoke and mirrors were gone, he sought to make a way for himself in a world that was rapidly changing and never quite finds that place where he could, put down roots permanently. And so he has a place that claims him, but really he belongs to that era as a whole because he was all over.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, you said it pretty well. You can't bring up Squire without bringing up Daniel. And the sad thing is, the reality is, you shouldn't be able to bring up Daniel without bringing up Squire as well. Um,
Right.
Many of the feats that you hear about of Daniel, Squire was either right there beside him, or um, Squire experienced something similar in a different area, or something of that nature. It's just that popularity, the ability of Boone having a biography changes it for the brothers. Um, many of the same things, come to Kentucky, um, help settle many settlers, bring many people over, get into land trouble, leave Kentucky. Um, Difference would be Squire came back and had a few different other things go on. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's how it is. He's just as important as Boone was by many traits or many feats, if you want to uh, um, uh, add it up like that. We could do an episode of Daniel Boone versus Squire Boone, who did the most. But the thing is, most likely Daniel Boone's probably going to win just because he has more information documented about him. Um,
Yep.
and having to go um, back. The one thing I think that stands out the most, being biased is one. He came back to Kentucky. Squire came back to Kentucky and did do some things after a while. The other thing is that I find it notable or um, praiseworthy that he, the Baptist minister, he really held on to his faith in many
Yeah.
ways. And just, I just you don't hear a lot about it from Boone's side of things. And not that he wasn't or anything like that, but whenever you read, you don't get that as much. Um, the other thing that Boone seems there's a lot more documentation of his interaction with Native Americans and so forth. But C.O. Squire, he never got caught. So,
That's right.
or at least,
Captured, you can't,
yeah, so
of
that we
course,
know
because
about.
that Squire's never,
Go
right,
ahead.
he's never court-martialed, so there's no
Yeah.
records. As awful as that is, for historians, it's a great treasure because you have records about it. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's about it, I guess. On that, anything else to add?
I think you've got it.
All right. Well,
You've summed it up.
we'll wrap it up right there. Again, Squire Boone. I know his brother got 3 episodes, but uh, we got we got to work with what we can work with. But yeah, Squire Boone, definitely a notable Kentucky frontiersman that needs to be mentioned. We got some more plans for some other frontiersmen, William Whitley and so forth. We're digging up as many as we can. Um, and then we'll eventually move on to something else.
Sounds right.
Yeah. So Anyway, thanks again, David, for joining us. It's a good talk. Hope people learn some good stuff about Squire Boone, the Forgotten Boone. I feel like that's a good title that I'll have to use, or we'll have to put on there, is the Forgotten Boone. So anyway,
it sums it up. Yep. No, thanks for having me, and you were absolutely right.
Yep. Thanks again, everybody, for watching or listening. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goble, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.